Welcome to Cox Talks by Kat Scheffler, which is me. Today I'm going to be talking about seat racing. I got a question about it, and I'm so here for it. I forgot about seat racing. It's been such a long time. So I'm going to talk about what it is, maybe some tips. If you're joining in live, you can go ahead and put some seat racing related questions. If you were looking for last week's video, I'm going to re-upload it because I made a mistake. I mixed up port and starboard. Who does that? And so I'm going to re-upload it. But today, seat racing. So what is seat racing? Seat racing is a way to measure different rowers against each other and how they actually move the boat, because there's not just one thing that makes a rower the best fit for a boat. And it's not just their erg score or how strong they are or how tall they are. It's how they're going to blend in with the rest of the boat, or how their technique on the water actually moves the boat. So it's not an exact science. It's pretty difficult, and it's just kind of coaches use it to gauge. It's one factor, right, that coaches are going to use. So the way seat racing works is that, say you start with two boats, and you race them. If you're racing for spring, the 2,000 meter races, sprint racing, then you're probably going to be doing something between a 1 and 2K for seat races, because you have to do multiple races in a row. So say we're doing these two boats against each other, and they make it through, and they end with boat B one length ahead of boat A. On the next race, you're going to switch two people, from one from A into B and B into A, and then you're going to start them again. And this time, if the boats finish the piece even, it's not a tie between both of those rowers that were switched, because originally boat B was faster than boat A by a whole length, and now they're even. So that means that whoever switched into boat B essentially made it slower, and whoever switched into boat A essentially made it faster, because now they're even. And that's the tricky part that sometimes people don't get, is it's not about who wins that piece. It's about the margin compared to the previous piece. So now that they're even again, if you switch two different rowers and you race again, and now we finish with boat A 2 lengths ahead of boat B, whoever switched into boat A made it significantly faster than who switched into boat B, right? And then on the next piece, if they were like this, it's the same idea. You're looking at the margin. Let's see. When you are coxing a seat race, there's two different things that a coach is going to ask of you. Sometimes the coach is going to ask you not to cox at all, because they do not want the coxswain to influence the motivation of the rower. And then sometimes you're allowed to just totally do your thing. So assuming you're allowed to totally do your thing, I'm going to do that first. Then things that you want to keep in mind: A, steer straight. You are so not doing yourself or anyone a favor if your course is wonky, because now instead of it being that fair distance, you're either, if you're going by time, you're adding meters. I guess if you're going by distance, then it's just not an easy gauge, because you're going to hit that distance sooner than you think you're going to, because you added meters. So steer straight. As far as giving information, you're going to balance making technical calls with a lot of motivation, because this is when we are on. When we're on. And when you're in these seat races or a real race, you're primarily supposed to be making motivational calls. That's when we finally get into that motivation. You're not making as many technical calls. You have to make technical calls if there's a correction that needs to be fixed. You're not going to call out one person's weird thing, just like in a race. but you are going to remind them of things they need to be aware of, and you're going to make the technical calls for the entire boat to make it efficient. So you can make motivational calls. The ones that I really like, that I think are super useful, best one you can do is where you are on the other boat, right? Because you're starting even. So right away, start giving that information of, I'm on coxswain, we're even. And if you start to move, roll with it. I have half a seat, I have 1 seat, I have 3 seat, and I'm on bow seat. That's the information that is super duper motivating, and it's not hard. It's not like critical thinking. You have to give that information, and that's the best motivation you can do. If you are losing your seat race, well, it's not your seat race. If your boat is losing, then what is absolutely, absolutely critical to remind your rowers of is that seat racing is not about which boat is in front. It's about the margin on the previous race and the next race, right? Because you're now going to compare to the next one. They have to keep pulling the whole time, even if they're losing, because they might be the next one switched. So if they're going easy on this race because they're losing, and then they're switched, and on that next piece, it's going to really be detrimental to that rower that gets switched. So what I do is, if I'm in a boat that is losing, is you continue to motivate the crap out of them, and you're reminding them, not constantly, because you don't want to be like a downer, like it's all about margins, girls, doesn't matter, or boys, whoever, women, men, but you don't know who's going to be seat raced. This might be your seat race. Stay consistent, right? We frame things in a positive, affirming way. This might be your seat race. Or the other thing I like to do is, seat racing only works when everybody else in the boat is consistent. And even so, seat racing is impacted by the water, the wind, some random, like somebody caught a crab or had a bad stroke and it's not even the person being seat raced. There's so many factors. But what's really important is you have to be consistent, because if, 6 seat of both boats is switched, but like bow pair of one boat decides like, I'm getting tired, they're totally throwing the seat race for somebody else. So if you are reminding and using that motivation of, you owe this to your teammates to be consistent, and you have to be consistent. And also, coaches look at the people that they don't seat race either. I'm still your seat race, because if they notice, why does that boat keep getting slower and slower and slower? People are starting to give up. I've been in boats that by the end of the practice, they had switched every single person, and it was now the original boat, but in the other shell, and they were winning and now they're losing. So they let the rhythm of the boat and everything get to them, and now they were losing even though they were winning, and it's the same exact lineup in a different boat. So you want to be on them of, we have to be consistent. This is your seat race. Even if it's not your seat race, it's your seat race. And then telling them where they are on the other boat, even when you're down, because it's about margins, right? So, if you're like 3 lengths down, maybe at that point it doesn't matter. But, if you're 3 seats down, you're 6 seats down. If you're within a length, first of all, I always call seats. If you have some open water, then you can give a couple seats of open water as a gauge. It's not until after there's like a length of open water that I think maybe, you can just kind of focus in on the boat. Technical calls. Again, you want to be consistent too. You want to be consistent with your coxing. Stay on. Give the same energy. Technique is tough because you could make a technical call that might fix something that wasn't there in the previous two pieces. But, if the ratio is getting really short, obviously you're going to fix the ratio. If things are starting to happen, if people are starting to catch late, you're going to stay on it. But just remember that you also have to be consistent. You don't want to flip-flop between like one piece you called a lot of technique, and the next piece you called time a lot, and then the next piece you made sure to call everybody's name. That can be inconsistent. You want to try to be as consistent as possible. The other thing is sometimes seat racing coaches don't want you to cox. And there are different levels of that. For instance, sometimes they will say be 100% silent and don't say anything. In which case, try not to fall asleep. Steer straight. Steer straight. Your job is kind of boring because it kind of feels like you're like a sack of potatoes, but you gotta do your job. Steer straight. And then I do like to kind of do a breakdown in between pieces if you're allowed to, which is, hey guys, on that piece, it felt like we were getting really short. Let's remember on the next piece to lengthen out. I like to do that even if you're not supposed to be silent, but, kind of do that and keep on as much as you can, even when you're not allowed to talk during the piece. Come back in and say, hey, seems like we were really rushing stroke seat, blah, blah, blah. How did that feel to you guys? What can we do? What can we work on? Sometimes you're allowed to do like minimal coxing. That's what I like to do with my novice rowers sometimes is I call it minimal coxing, like bare bones coxing, which is you're not coxing, you're not giving motivation, but you do give just the informational calls of how much time is, left or how, you give them time, and you can give them or distance, time and distance. And sometimes that's it, right? You give time and distance, and that's the only thing you're allowed to give. And if that's all you're allowed to give it often. Like at least, if you're giving time, at least every minute. If you're giving distance, at least every 500 minimum. Some rowers are going to want it more or less, and you're going to gauge that. But those are the good ones, right? At least every minute and at least every 500. It could be double that, right? They might want time every 30 seconds and every distance every 250. It depends on how long the piece is, and it depends on the rowers. But if that's the only information you're allowed to give it. Don't let them sit there. Sometimes you're allowed to make corrections that are big. Like if the ratio is getting really bad, you're allowed to call ratio. It depends on what your coach wants, right? But if you don't do a lot in a seat race, whatever you're allowed to do obviously is going to impact this. But if you can't figure out what to do, things that you need to do: 1, steer straight; 2, give time and distance; 3, where they are on the other boat. Those are the most important things. Absolutely. Give that, and then you're pretty good. Like if you're not good at motivation or figuring out what to say, if you just give that a lot, you're pretty solid. So do that. Do time, distance, where you are on the other boats. Remind them every race is your seat race. It doesn't matter if you're being switched or not. You stay consistent. Stay consistent for your team and for yourself, because you might be switched at any minute. Cool. I'm going to keep this one shorter than usual because I think that's all I got for seat racing. I don't know if there's anything else. Cool. Thank you for watching, and leave me your questions so I can do a response on it. Thanks, everybody. Bye.